Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Kirsty.
And this is our podcast covering the highs, lows and realities of parenting a child with neurodiversity.
Each week we'll be sharing updates from our lives and hearing from a variety of guests about their advice and experiences.
This is Love Needs No Words. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Love Needs No Words. Today we are joined by Michelle Violet, or Autism Mum Wellness Coaching on Instagram. As parents, we all know how difficult this journey can be, the whole process from diagnosis, the acceptance, the grief, and then the amount of knowledge you have to gain very quickly to write EHCP'S, pick the right school. It's incredibly overwhelming and can lead to stress, anxiety, worry, the list goes on, which is where Michelle can jump in and help. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle.
No, thanks for having me.
I guess a good place to start is on that word acceptance, because a lot of this journey for us as SEND parents, you're a SEND parent yourself, you know what it's like to sort of have to deal with the grief when you get that diagnosis and all the other things that come with it, and the acceptance and sort of where you go to get that time for you. So what do you sort of offer for parents that are struggling emotionally?
I think, acceptance is a tricky one for people, because the minute you sort of talk about acceptance, people feel defensive that, of course they accept their child as they are, but it's not even about accepting the diagnosis. I think it's accepting how that diagnosis transfers to everyday life, like now and in the future. So, when I'm working with moms, I try and explore exactly what's going on for them at that moment in time, and what aspects of that they are struggling to accept, because you will go through different stages throughout your SEN journey, and so you'll have different things that you're going to have to accept. So for example, if your child suddenly can't be in school, that in itself is a huge deal, because obviously your beliefs are challenged as well, because you're told that school is the place that they need to be. There's a lot of pressure for you to get your child into school. So just accepting that they can't is really difficult. And then obviously on top of that, we've got parents that either have to give up work to be at home with their child, or leave or change jobs in some way. So that's a huge acceptance piece, because life literally changes overnight when your child can't go in school. So it's just around working out what's going on for that parent at that moment in time, and then letting parents feel what they want to feel, and knowing that that's okay. If they want to sit and cry and scream and swear, there's no judgment. It's a safe place. Being a mom to an autistic child myself, it's a lot of the thoughts that they're having I've probably already had, and so it's just that safe space for people to let loose, to say the things that they wouldn't normally say out loud.
I notice that there's certain situations that I find myself in that rise me instantly, and I can literally feel my stress levels going up. One of them is when I get a call from the school. And I can literally feel myself getting so tense, and it's very difficult to know what you can do in those moments to avoid that fight or flight feeling where you just, I just rise immediately. I guess very rarely have I ever had a call from school for it to be a positive reason. So
and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like all those previous times where you've had those issues, they sort of pile on top of each other unless you're clear in how you feel about it in the moment. So it's just stacking up. It's one event on top of another, and you're taking all those events with you into that new one. So every time you get that call from the school, everything that's happened before that's been negative, you're just feeling it instantly, even though it might not be that bad this time. Your body remembers, and you feel that kind of rush of whatever it may be, sadness, or your heart sinking, fear, So and that's what EFT does. It helps you clear those past emotions as well, so you're not always taking this baggage forward into the next issue or challenge that you have. I mean, guilt's another really big one for moms, and you can stack that like for years. And so it's clear in the past as well, all the things that that has happened to us as kids or as we've grown, you know, all those experiences we've had, all the beliefs that we've held from you know, the things that have happened to us. Our kids can trigger some of those things, you know. If you, I think one of the things with moms is not feeling good enough. And so if you've had incidences in the past where you've not felt good enough, and then your parenting's being challenged by, you know, an education professional or a GP or something like that, you know, again, you're stuck in those instances and they're just getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and you just feel horrible, you know, and all those previous memories are stacked into that, unless you start to try and clear that pathway a little. Does that make sense?
Complete sense.
Yeah,
And I think, like, for everyone listening, I think we're all dealing with like varying conditions that we would never have expected. And I know Kirsty and I have spoken about it before, where, you know, I got Alex's diagnosis. There was no one in the family that had autism. I then went into the like fight or flight mode where I had to research everything about it. Then what can I do to help him? And you sort of think, how long has it been where it's been all about helping him and focusing on him? What can I do to help him? What more can I do? And that guilt that you're not doing enough. And Alex is pre-verbal now, but he was non-verbal for a very long time, and I kept thinking, there must be more I can do, there must be. And then you suddenly get to a point where you're like, when have I had time to relax? How am I switching off? How am I being looked after? Because I'm putting every emphasis on looking after him. And I'm sure there's many people that you've spoken to in a similar position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, everybody's situation's really different as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, when you talk to moms, the journey's never the same, you know, but guaranteed none of them give themselves time. There's so much pressure that we put on ourselves, but also pressure that we feel elsewhere. You know, whether that be from teachers and schools, or, you know, friends and family as well, who don't fully understand. So there's an awful lot that moms deal with emotionally, and it's draining. And I think people don't understand how draining emotions are. And what happens with a lot of moms, and it happened with myself, is that you just stop doing the basics. You stop, like, eating well, and you stop eating often. You know, you don't eat on a regular basis. Then it's kind of, you know, the end of the day and you can't be bothered to cook, your kid's gone to bed, you know, you've got a little bit of respite in between them waking up again, and, you know, it's just about chucking anything down your neck, just to eat at that point. I know parents that have sat and just doom scrolled the whole evening because they just don't have the capacity for anything else. Yeah, it's just, and it you know, it is existing, it's not living. But I think people just get a little bit stuck and they don't know what to do to get out of it. And that's, you know, that's where a lot of parents do come, and we have that conversation around the basis of what I do is not to add any extra to someone's life. So whatever kind of coaching I deliver, it's never about making anything overcomplicated. So it is literally, people jump on a call and we'll have that call, and it'll be about what can they physically cope with. And some people, you know, it is really the bare minimum, where others, you know, they might be able to schedule running into their life 3 times a week. But for one mom, it was just a case of, instead of sitting there doom scrolling, it was like, well, what if you just sat there and did something like have a foot spa and have some hand cream and just sit there, no doom scrolling, no snacking, but just sit comfortable, just being, you know, not doing anything, but you know, a little tiny bit of time. She could fit that in because he was just replacing one bad habit with one healthier habit and something that was a little bit more relaxing. And of course, you know, with the doom scrolling, you've got the comparison trap. So, you know, you're looking at all these families, especially during summer holidays and things, where people are going away, they're going to Alton Towers for the day, or, you know, there's all these family events and everyone's happy on Facebook, there's all these pictures, and, you know, you're sat at home and your kids can't leave, or if they do, it's a whole 3 hours before you can get out the door, and then you don't know what's going to happen when you do get out the door. And so it is really hard and it's really tricky. So it's just about small steps that's really the key, is to not add anything into your life that you can't cope with, but sometimes just switching one thing for another, so it's not taking any additional time or headspace, but it's actually just giving you something better than what you were having.
The social media thing, the algorithm's really strong as well. So I would imagine for a lot of us, we're actually scrolling on things that are related to the things that are bringing the kind of stress or anxiety or worry or whatever it might be into our lives. So I know with mine, there's lots of the stuff on my social media is around autism and ADHD and various different things for obvious reasons. But that's what I'm dealing with all day. So if I'm then sitting there in the evening, supposedly trying to switch off, but actually still reading, it's probably not actually very helpful. Even though some of it is really like empowering stuff, but it's not allowing your brain to switch off from that situation at all. That it's you're just revisiting it.
I've had to leave a few Facebook groups in the past because they've been helpful, but then there's been an awful lot of just really sad stories with no positive outcome or sort of suggestion for moving forward for people, and it's just been really sad and really hard to constantly read, because you're just like, I can't always have this information coming in because it's not helpful for me, so I've had to separate myself from some of it. There's lots of groups that are really helpful and really positive, but some others where there's just a lot of complaining about services and things like that, which is rightly so, because not all of them are great. But I think you do have to kind of police exactly what you're taking in, and that's what a lot of people don't do, because it's not something that crosses their mind to.
Yeah, and it's just there, isn't it? It's instant. It's that dopamine hit as well. You've just got it, your phone in your hand. Whereas like, I really like to read. My books aren't always close by, so I might just instantly pick up my phone. Whereas it would be nicer to read. It would probably be more productive. It would be quality time switching off, but it's just easier to pick up the phone.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that point as well, where our focus is so much on our children and or whoever you're caring for throughout the day, and then you're even thinking about it at night, like what the next day will bring and how you're going to deal with those things, that actually just having someone like yourself, Michelle, saying, look, why don't you switch that with that? It's just helping you because you haven't got that brain capacity to think about that time. Like you say, just grabbing your phone and looking through stuff is just easy. Where if someone can say to you, well, how about you try that? It's somebody giving you advice rather than you having to
think of it for yourself.
Yeah.
Permission as well, giving the moms the permission to say, do you know what, it's okay to have or want things for yourself. It's okay to need that bit of time. And again, that ties into a lot of guilt, that they think they should be sitting there going through the forms and sitting there reading the books. And I think we as moms, we are natural problem solvers. So when your kid gets a diagnosis, it's like, what do I need to do to help? Where else can I go? It's the same as, okay, well, now it's the DLA forms, or now it's the EHCP, or now it's GPs and occupational therapists, and you're so focused on what you need to do, and there's so much of it as well, that just sitting there taking time for you feels wrong. And it's crazy, because one thing that I've learned is that putting yourself first, not even first, it's just putting yourself in the mix, is so important, because the stronger you are, the better you can give to your child, the stronger you can fight. You've got more clarity, more focus, more energy when you've taken care of yourself. But that's the sort of disconnect with moms, that they're not realizing that. So some will, but because you get so stuck in, it's really weird. I think as soon as you get that diagnosis, you're kind of like catapulted into this huge world, and it's really all consuming. And that's one of the words that a lot of moms use, is all consuming. And that's frightening, really, isn't it? Because you just disappear. A lot of time they don't want to go out, even if they can, because of the guilt. when you've got other parents that just can't, and that's really difficult. So it's working, what can they do if they can't go out, and they've got no support? What's the bare minimum that person can do? And I'm a strong believer that there's always something, however small, and it might only be small. But the thing with those small steps is that, if you do them consistently, they do make a difference, so you're just building on it. And some people think it's got to be these huge, big things that they need to change for it to make a difference. And it really doesn't,
Yeah, I think allowing yourself that time. I know for me, I've learned that having my own space makes me a better parent because it re-energizes me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Makes me more resilient in those moments that I talked about earlier, like when the school calls, for example. If I am, if my bucket is full, so to speak, I'm going to deal with that so much worse, and it's going to go on for longer, and then you end up maybe in a situation where you get frustrated with your child, or you can't, you're just not in a place of clarity to be able to deal with it.
And of course, that frustration, then if you share that frustration, then you feel guilty.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's just a lot of heightened emotions all the time, unless you've got a practice where you can kind of tune into that and then kind of let those feelings be and then let them go. A lot of the time we're just kind of shoving them down all the time. We're kind of burying them. And a lot of moms actually say that they just feel numb, that they've buried so much that they're just numb. And that's quite a difficult space for them to be in.
Recognizing as well that those moments will come up where you do, get frustrated, because we're human and we can't be perfect all of the time, and that's okay as well. To not beat ourselves up about the fact, okay, you know what, I didn't deal with that situation in the best way possible. In hindsight, and maybe I would have dealt with it in a different way. But that's all I had in that moment.
Yeah. And that's it again, is it? It's recognizing, what I'm doing my best with what I've got at the time. I mean, for me, my daughter, she's unable to go to school. And when that first happened, she wasn't diagnosed at the time. So I was working with the school to kind of get her in. And of course, their goal was to get her in any capacity, shape or form that we could. And so there was a lot of pressure put on myself. So I was then feeding that into my daughter. And of course, I feel, well, I don't know, I've managed that, but I felt so guilty when I finally was like, this is just wrong. I can't do that to her anymore. But, there was a lot of guilt, but I didn't know any better at the time. I didn't know that, I could ask for certain things. I didn't know that I could just say, look, no, she can't do it, and this is the thing, like, we can only do our best in that moment, and we all make mistakes. And I think, every mom with a neurodivergent child has probably made a mistake of some sort, because it's just not a clear journey. Motherhood in general is it? So
you're learning as you go along, aren't you, all of the time? And there's no book that tells you exactly what you should do. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But there isn't. And it's very difficult when you are parenting. Amy, you kind of just mentioned it earlier on. You were talking about there's no one in the family that's autistic. If you don't know anyone that's had to parent in that way before, you've really not got a lot of tools to be able to draw on. It's hard to be able to draw from your own childhood and such, like, because lots of things that are kind of typical behavioural strategies and such, they just don't work. So
no.
You are learning all of the time and having to change things up all the time, and what worked one week then doesn't work the week after. So
it's a reframing it as well, isn't it? Like, I've made this mistake, but actually what you've done is you've learned what not to do. So it's a positive lesson. Like, okay, so I won't do that again because I know what the outcome would be. I don't think they're ever mistakes. They're just kind of learning experiences. And if you can see it like that instead of a mistake, it's going to be a lot more empowering for you.
Definitely. And I think for you, Michelle, and for many people listening, when your child is diagnosed later and they've been masking a long time, and you're dealing with all of that, where it's like you've got so far and then suddenly there's just this massive change, and you're having to kind of navigate that sort of later in life, and you've got the hormones and everything else. It's a lot.
I mean, throughout her life, there was always kind of, I'd looked at autism several times, but the information back then was very geared towards boys, what boys were experiencing. So, you'd look at the list and it'd be like, yeah, there's a bit of that, or yeah, there's a bit of that, but no, 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 no. Okay, so it's not autism, then it's something else,
Yeah.
So it kind of went on like that for me. I was back and forth with it. But the information, like I say, and I didn't know anybody who had a neurodivergent child, so it was kind of confusing. And I think it was the moment when she said she couldn't, and that was the interesting thing. She said she couldn't be in school, she couldn't go. It wasn't I won't go. And that's like really important language, is that she couldn't explain why, but she just couldn't go, and she was so clearly distressed about it as well. And that was when I was like, okay, I'm going to chase that diagnosis now. And that was when I spoke to the GP and I said, look, I don't think it's mental health. Initially I was a bit concerned that it might be, but then I was like, there's too much other stuff over the years, and you start learning a little bit more about it. And then luckily for me, one of her friends that she met at secondary school, she was also going down the autism pathway, and I got to know her mom, who'd already got an autistic son. So I think for me, that was really, really helpful. More than anything else, was just knowing another mom that had got some experience of it, and that really helped. So I did feel really lucky to have met someone, but not everybody does. But luckily my daughter was diagnosed really quickly.
Good.
So it was just, I don't know, right place, right time, for us. But yeah, it wasn't a shock. And I think a lot of parents that are, chasing that diagnosis say they feel relieved, which seems really strange. But I think it's because everything that you've thought and all your feelings and struggles seem validated.
Yeah.
When they get that diagnosis. So in a weird way, it is a bit of a relief.
And how is she now, Michelle?
She still doesn't go to school. So it's been 2 years. To be fair, she was in total burnout. But because the school were really pushing for her to go in, and she tried, bless her, she tried everything that she could, to the point that she just couldn't anymore. But I think because that happened over quite a period of time, it kind of delayed her healing, as it were. So she's struggled for a lot longer than she needed to. But now she does engage in mentoring. So she has 2 mentors now. So I feel very, very lucky that we have that. She's still enrolled in school. She just doesn't, she just can't go at the moment. So it's a slow and steady process. I had 2 jobs at the time, and I had to quit one of them to be at home more. So that was, we've had to adapt in that sense as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's like I say, I think with some things there's there's quite a few steps forward, and then there's other things that she struggles with and it feels like a few steps back. Yeah. And so, there's always something going on, but you can see, you can see progress and you can see those wins. And I think that's what I do try and do a lot with the moms, is that, every day there's going to be some small win in your day, and it's really important to look for that, because otherwise you just get bogged down with all the negativity. So yeah, just finding those small moments. I mean, if my daughter was at school, I wouldn't have spent half as much time with her that I can. So that's brilliant for me. I think that's a huge bonus, because one of my issues from years ago was that I had to go back to work when she was really young. So I always felt guilt for that. So I almost feel like I'm being repaid with a little bit of time now. So I just, there's just ways of looking at things, isn't there? And
also that she's in her safe space. She's learning in the way that feels right for her. and she's happy. I think we can all agree when your child's happy, you're happy, because when they're at their worst, it's that fight or flight situation, and you don't look after yourself because you're focusing so much on how to help them. Yeah, she's in the best place that she can be right now, and you have to be secure in that knowledge of that.
Absolutely. I think it takes, I think, like I say, I was working with the school and I felt under a lot of pressure to do what they were telling me because I didn't know any other way. And then at some point I just thought, do you know what, I'm not listening to my gut instinct on this.
Yes.
Because I'd always had this feeling that it just wasn't right. It just didn't feel right. It just felt like it was just making everything worse. And I just thought, this isn't, they don't have a best interest at heart, no matter what they were saying. It was constantly about that tick box, ticking a box that she's in school, or that she's been in school. So I think it was just one day, it just felt really wrong. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to ever listen to anybody else when it comes to what I believe is right for her. And I'm probably too protective now, even like when I'm dealing with the local authority and stuff, we're like trying to move her forward, but I'm also very kind of, okay, but let's not push too hard, because I don't want her going backwards to where she was when she first couldn't be at school, because it was hard. It was, so to see a clever, bright, funny kid who was sociable, she can do things that other kids can do, but I think she was just so burnt out. It was so hard because it felt, and I think it felt more so for my family, was that it just happened overnight. Whereas I think as a mom, you kind of see the struggles coming.
Is that something that comes up quite often? Mums struggling with or finding it difficult to kind of separate that social expectation that they feel, what they should do, etc., from the actual reality that they are dealing with their child?
Yeah, I think a lot of mums feel quite judged, and so again, that forces you to do things that you aren't right, just to kind of comply sometimes. I've had moms that their kids have been out all day, when they come home, she knows that they just can't cope with anymore, yet because family want to come around and see them, they've allowed that to happen, knowing full well that it wasn't the right thing for their kids. But because of this expectation on the family and trying to keep, it's the people pleasing as well, trying to keep everybody happy, it's a real struggle. But judgment comes up a lot,
Yeah, it's a horrible emotion to feel as well, judgment.
Yeah, especially for those whose kids, maybe play up in the supermarkets or wherever it may be, public transport, whatever, because, they're just totally overwhelmed by the situation. And, if I see that now, I know exactly what's going on. But, somebody else who hasn't got a neurodivergent child in their family might not recognize that. And so, we all judge instantly, it's whether you stick to that judgment, that's the difference. But I think there's a lot more awareness now, but the understanding isn't there.
Yeah.
That judgment starts so early on, doesn't it, in parenting? Aside from having a neurodivergent child, you've got it right from the very beginning. How do you feed your child? How does your child sleep? Everybody has an opinion on how you parent your child. And then, if you end up going down this journey as well, that's an added layer that you're then having to process, cope with, deal with in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the older generation as well, isn't it? Who, autism wasn't around back then, and so it's like, well, can't you just make them do the thing that they can't do, or say, you know what I mean? Make them come down and talk to us. Can't you make them? It's like you do feel like a bad parent because you can't get your child to do what's expected in the typical world, and so you do feel, well, why can't they do that? I've questioned myself in the past before the diagnosis, to be fair, but you're like, well, why can't they do that? But no one ever says, I wonder if there's something underlying, I wonder if there's something wrong. You know, it's always about your parenting. What I do is I give parents a tool that they can continue to use. So, you know, they've got like a self-help tool that they can take with them. So it's not something that they can just do in a session with me. They've got it beyond sessions as well. So, you know, they can continue clearing those, you know, those negative beliefs about themselves. They can, you know, manage their stress in those really challenging situations. And it, you know, it works really well. I mean, one thing that's happening with moms, which I love, is, you know, when they are kind of working on themselves and they are putting themselves into that mix, it's improving their relationships with their children, which is amazing, to be honest, because they feel so much more confident. And I think they feel more able to kind of understand and view things from a different way, and so, you know, see their child in a different way sometimes, which is, yeah, it's really heartwarming to see that, because, you know, being stuck under all that stress, it's hard to see anything, isn't it?
And really rewarding as well. I mean, you touched on judgment there, but what would you say are some of the common topics that you're seeing parents coming to you for coaching on?
Guilt is the big one, and then it's how they put themselves into the mix because they don't know how to, and also they don't give themselves permission. Those are the main things, and acceptance tends to come out of the conversations around those big emotions. Relationship struggles also are being highlighted quite a lot. Once they've dealt with some of the other stuff that they're feeling, then they're recognizing that actually, you know, there's issues in the relationship that, you know, can be dealt with, but there's issues around communication. Your kids have all your time, and so your partner doesn't really get you at all. You know, if they're used to having you all that time, then when you've got a child, I mean, that goes anyway, but when you've got a child with additional needs, you're so focused on them that, you know, it doesn't feel as important, I think, sometimes, to focus on the relationship, until all of a sudden you realize actually there's a little bit
neglected for so long.
Yeah.
It's not surprising the rates of divorce are so high in parents who've got children with additional needs.
I think different views, and it happens with most parents, doesn't it? You've got different views how you bring that child up, and, you know, if one of you is struggling with the diagnosis and the other isn't, obviously, you know, I mean, that doesn't happen with everybody, but that can happen. And then you throw in, you know, in-laws into the mix as well, and their views, and it's a lot, you know, it's a lot for people to deal with. Again, they're just very big emotions, and it's just something else to deal with. And it's like sometimes they just haven't got the headspace to even try, because it's, again, where do I start? You know, that's just a whole other issue now that I've got to deal with. But you know, you're forever growing, aren't you, as a mom? A lot of women actually just crack on, and they'll just do it themselves, and they don't ask for help, but they expect their partner to know exactly what it is that they need without telling them. And so, you know, you get resentment, you get irritated, and the poor bloke doesn't have a clue why, because he doesn't know what he's supposed to have done or not done. It's just that, you know, that disconnect, that lack of communication. And because, you know, you want him to be psychic, you want him to know what you need, because you haven't got the headspace to tell him, you know, or it depends on your relationship. So it's, you know, it's tricky. It really is tricky.
I think we're laughing because we know that that's happened to us before.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where you just assume they know what's wrong, and you're like, can you not read
you didn't tell me. You think, well, I'm sure I did. Showing some capacity.
Yeah, I haven't got the capacity to speak to you and tell you what's wrong right now.
Yeah, and it's worse if you've got no outside support as well.
Yeah, it makes such a huge difference if you've got support, you know.
Yeah, if you've got, you know, somebody who can watch the kids for a little bit, so you can have a bit of time, even if it's just a little bit of lockdown and straight back home, you know. It's a bit of time to remember who you were as a couple. but all parents need that. I think, you know, you need that time away from your kid. And I think my mum and dad always said to us, you've got to have time for yourselves. Like, I've got 2 sisters with kids as well, and my mum and dad have always said that, and their parents said that to them, you know.
Yeah.
You've got kids, but you need your time to yourself. But yeah, when you don't have that outside support, it is tricky.
Tough.
It's tricky.
Because we started doing date days because John works at some evenings, and actually that's been really great because they're at school or at nursery, and then you've just got that time in the day to just go and sort of remember why you fell in love with each other, because the kids are all consuming that you actually just don't have fun. Like, it's all about the kids. So yeah, just going and doing, an activity that you wouldn't usually do and just have a bit of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We took to going out for breakfast every now and then.
Nice.
Like, you know, just something, because, you know, my daughter sleeps late, so she's never been an early riser. So it's, you know, we were able to pop out for an hour, have a bit of breakfast or coffee somewhere, and then come back home. And, you know, you do feel like you've done something then.
Yeah.
Even if it's just that small, and it doesn't need to be, again, it's these things that they don't need to be these grand, huge things where you're going out or you're staying away, or you know, it just doesn't need to be like that. But I think just to be able to get together and, like you say, remember why you're together.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it depends on the topic you're dealing with, but what are some of the sort of key techniques that you'll say to people? Why don't you try this, just to give yourself some time?
One of the things that I do try and encourage people to do is to remember, you know, what they used to like doing. And, like, say, that question, you know, what do you enjoy, what lights you up, is one of the things that upsets people the most, because then they realize how much they've neglected themselves. But they always come up with something, and some of it's, you know, it's amazing. Like, some people love horse riding, some people are like really creative and love like crochet and things like that. Other people, you know, they love writing or photography, and it's, you know, it's been a huge passion in the past, and they've just forgotten. And it's like, okay, so, like, what's one small thing you can do to kind of reconnect with that? You know, if it's writing, like, can you do 10 minutes last thing at night, or in the morning, or in the middle of your day with a cuppa? You know, it doesn't have to be you're going to write a book. You know, it doesn't have to be with any particular purpose other than to enjoy the fact that you can do that, even if it's just for a little bit of time. So I think, you know, it is really important for them to connect to something that reminds them of who they are. You know, one woman I work with, she loved to read. Yeah, like you say, Kirsty, that, you know, you love to read but don't do it. And she'd got this lovely big chair in her bedroom that was just piled with clothes. So she cleared that space, and when her daughter did go to school, because that again wasn't very often, but when she did get her to school, then she could come home and she would just have 30 minutes with a coffee, sit on that chair with a book.
Oh, I love that.
To, you know, it's funny, it just gives you something that you've been missing.
Yeah.
And I think once you start to feel that, you're more inclined to keep repeating it, because you, even if it's only for a short bit of time, it feels good, you know. And so, yeah, a lot of parents are like, okay, I can see how that could fit in, but maybe not this week, but definitely next week. And then you're like, hold on a second, let's work this out. What's going on this week that you can't do it, you know? So it's sometimes they'll throw in, oh yeah, definitely going to do that, and then it's like, but maybe not this week, or maybe not this month. And it's like, okay, so how much do you need to strip that back to be able to do it this week, you know? So it's really trying to get into that, bring that awareness, isn't, you know, you can do something, you know. Don't always put it off, because that's what you do, you know, you put it off, you put yourself last, and it never happens. So it's, you know, I always say put yourself first, but it's not that. It is literally putting yourself into the mix, so you get what you need as well as everybody else.
Some of that will be trial and error as well. After my daughter was born, I started going and getting my nails done, and I don't know why. I think it was just I needed half an hour to myself, so I thought, oh, I'll go and do this. And actually, it's become a bit of a habit, because just going and chatting nonsense with someone who doesn't know me, doesn't know the situation, has no emotional investment in it whatsoever, but it's really stuck. and I found myself ring fencing that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also doing things that you did before you had kids. So my thing's running, so I've started running again. And it's like you were saying, it's just that it doesn't have to be every day. It can be a couple of times a week. I know Kirsty goes swimming, but it's just time to be you, not mum, not
Yeah.
wife, just Amy for half an hour a day and just being in your own space. And I
Yeah.
think it's just so important.
It's a mini reset, I
Yeah.
mean, if parents, really can't find that, that time to do that, and some of them actually can't, it's just micro pockets of time. So it's like 2 minutes when you're boiling the kettle, can you do 2 minutes of breathing, just because that'll just settle you,
Mm-hmm.
or is it, can you walk around the garden for 2 minutes when, if your kid's having a nap or something, or your partner's there and can have them for 5, you can just nip out, have a little walk, just be in nature, away from the house, so it's just finding those tiny little moments in time, really. If you can't do anything else, if you can't do any, you can't commit to those slightly bigger things, it's actually those micro pockets of time throughout the day you probably can find, especially times where you're picking up your phone, and before you know it, it's been 20 minutes, and you're saying you've got no time for yourself. It's like, well, actually you could have had like 4 or 5 minute breaks for the cost of scrolling on your phone for 20 minutes. But it's recognizing that value, isn't it? That's the key.
What would you say people should be looking out for in themselves to suggest they should reach out for support?
If you're struggling with managing your emotions, so if you're kind of prone to almost bursting into tears quite frequently, that suggests that that's just emotional exhaustion, that your emotions are so heightened that you can't control them anymore. So I think that's quite a big one for people, recognizing again if there's relationship issues, if you're isolating yourself, again that's quite a common one, that parents will often say that your world shrinks when you have this diagnosis, but some people also shrink it on purpose. It's a safety mechanism, but it's not always beneficial to shut yourself off from people that might understand if you just gave them the chance. Drinking more than you would normally drink, gambling, social media doom scrolling, just shopping, trying to fill a gap or a void that it's not going to be filled permanently with these things. They're just temporary relief. So I think, a lot of those things suggest burnout, to be honest. As someone who's been through burnout, it takes a while to recover from, so I wouldn't recommend it. It's if you're not looking after yourself and you're well aware of that, then it might be time just to reach out to somebody and just ask for help, which is never easy for people, but it is the right thing to do.
Proactively reaching out as well before you even get to that point of all the things that you were talking about, I guess is even more, can be even more beneficial, because those things that you were talking about you've kind of reached crisis point in many ways. You've reached that point of there's going to be work that needs to be done, but you might not even necessarily think, oh, there's this one big thing that's clearly happening to me that makes me want to reach out. It might just be, I can kind of see how I can how I could be in that situation. And right at the beginning of this, I can already see that it's going to be quite a journey. Maybe I could reach out to someone now to help support me with this, so I don't end up in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got somebody to reach out to, then definitely just, I think, a lot of mums feel that if they meet up with a friend, they're just going to offload, and they don't want to be that person that just turns up and offloads and then goes home. But actually,
that's what friends are for.
Absolutely, yeah. If I always try and say to people, if that was your friend coming to you and doing that, would that be a problem for you? And no, absolutely not. Every time it's like, no way, I'd be there. So, well, don't deprive that person of being there for you. If you're lucky enough to have someone to reach out to, or even if it's just popping into one of these Facebook groups that are open for moms that are struggling, just to hear, that other people are in the same boat is quite reassuring. And sometimes, there is the odd tip and thing that you can try that another parent's posted. So that's always really helpful. But yeah, I mean, if you can reach out before you get to crisis point, but I think a lot of people, because they push so hard, they don't recognise until it's too late that they've actually hit that point. I know that's what it was like for me, and I was always very emotionally aware, but because I was pushing so hard, trying to do it all myself, that's when you realise actually you can't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
You can't be strong all the time. So if anyone's listening, Michelle, that wants to get involved with your wellness coaching, how do they go about it? And can you decide sort of how often you do it? What's the process?
So at the moment I offer it's a 12-week sort of deep dive one-to-one coaching, just purely because one-off sessions don't really tend to work as much as an intense block. So I have that, but what I also am in the process of building is like a low-cost monthly membership, so people can access myself and some of the techniques that I share as sort of a mini option, really. But I've also just launched a free coffee and conversation monthly online group, so any mom can join that's got a neurodivergent child and just wants to meet other moms. So it's going to be very relaxed. It's just going to be turning up and offloading if needs be. I might do some relaxation stuff or some tapping in that group depending on how the sessions go, but really I feel like there's a huge need for groups like that. Not everybody can get out. So there's a few ways that people could work with me or just come along and just be with me on a coffee and conversation session.
And where can they find your details?
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Michelle Violet, Autism Mums Wellness Coaching, and I also have my own Facebook group, which is the Self-Care Sanctuary for Autism Mums, and I post the odd tapping video and masterclass and things in there. So yeah, if people just want to start that journey of delving into looking after themselves a little bit better, then that would be a good place for them to start.
Brilliant. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so interesting. Just lovely to hear the sort of advice that you give and some of the techniques as well. And yeah, if anybody wants to get involved, then we'll put all the details on our Instagram page and Facebook as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.